You walk into a gym, and the first thing you hear is laughter. Not the kind that comes from a good workout or a joke between friends, no, this is the kind that makes your stomach tighten. The kind that says, "You don't belong here." In the corner, a heavy-set man struggles with the weights, his shirt damp with sweat, his breathing heavy. A group of gym regulars exchange smirks, whispering just loud enough for him to hear. "Look at this guy. What's he even doing here?" But here's the thing, they have no idea who he really is. And by the time they find out, it'll be too late. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever been judged for how you look? Ever walked into a room and felt every eye sizing you up, making assumptions before you even opened your mouth? That feeling, the heat in your chest, the voice in your head screaming, just wait till they see what I can really do. That's where our story begins. Because today, we're talking about underestimation. We're talking about the moment the underdog becomes the alpha. And if you've ever been counted out before you even had a chance to prove yourself, then this story isn't just entertainment, it's personal. I know why you clicked on this video. You want to see the look on their faces when the truth comes out. You want to watch the bullies realize they messed with the wrong guy. And trust me, you will get that moment. But here's the catch, the real lesson in this story isn't about revenge. It's about something deeper. Something that'll make you rethink how you see people, especially the ones society writes off too quickly. So if you're ready for a story that's equal parts satisfying, shocking, and straight up inspiring, then don't you dare click away. Because what happens next? It's the kind of twist you won't see coming. The gym is your typical hardcore fitness haven, mirrors on every wall, the clang of iron plates, the smell of sweat and determination. The regulars? They're the usual suspects. The muscle-bound guys who treat the place like their kingdom, the ones who think a gym is only for those who already look the part. And then there's him. Let's call him Jake. No flashy gear, no cocky strut. Just a quiet guy with a worn-out hoodie and a stubbornness that keeps him coming back, day after day, even as the whispers follow him. Then, one day, it happens. A loudmouth decides to take things beyond snide comments. He steps into Jake's space, smirks, and says the words that'll change everything: "Maybe you should try the treadmill if it can handle you." The gym goes quiet. Jake stops mid-rap. And for the first time, he looks the guy dead in the eye, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. A calm, chilling certainty. Because what none of them know is that Jake's hands are registered as lethal weapons. And in 3 seconds flat, this entire gym is about to find out why. But that's where we're hitting pause. Because before we get to the jaw-dropping reveal, you need to understand how this happened. How a man who looks like an easy target became the one nobody dares to challenge. And most importantly, what happens after the masks come off. So hit that like button, smash subscribe, and get ready. The real story starts now. Jake wasn't always the guy who moved through life unnoticed. There was a time when crowds roared his name, when his fists were feared, and his reputation alone made opponents second-guess stepping into the ring. But that was years ago, before the injury, before the media circus, before the whispers of washed up started following him like a shadow. These days, he keeps to himself, training in the dimly lit corners of gyms where no one recognizes him, where no one expects anything from him. And that's exactly how he wants it. Because Jake isn't here for glory anymore. He's here for something far more personal. The regulars at Ironclad Fitness only see what's on the surface: the extra weight, the slow movements, the way he avoids eye contact. They don't notice the way his footwork is still precise, the way his shoulders carry the memory of power, or the scars along his knuckles that tell a story of battles most of them couldn't survive. They don't know about the late-night phone calls he's been getting, the ones that leave him staring at the ceiling until dawn. Or the fact that he's been scouting this gym for weeks, studying its routines, its hierarchy, waiting for the right moment to make his move. Because this isn't just about proving a point. It's about sending a message. Then there's Marcus, the loudest of the gym's alpha dogs, the kind of guy who mistakes arrogance for confidence. He's the one who started the jokes, who turned Jake into the group's punching bag without ever throwing a real punch. But Marcus has his own secrets. The flashy Instagram posts hide the fact that he's drowning in debt, that his personal trainer certification is hanging by a thread, and that his girlfriend's been asking questions about the late nights he can't explain. He needs to be the king of this gym because it's the only place left where he feels in control. And the last thing he needs is some nobody wrecking that illusion. But Jake isn't the only wildcard in play. There's also Lena, the gym's manager, who watches everything with a quiet intensity. She's the one who approved Jake's membership without question, the one who's been slipping him extra protein shakes with a knowing look. Rumor has it she used to work the fight scene back in the day, and rumor also has it she's got a grudge against Marcus that runs deeper than gym politics. Then there's the new guy, Diego, a former Marine who's been eyeing Jake like he's trying to place where he's seen him before. The pieces are all there, scattered across the weight racks and locker rooms, but no one's putting them together yet. And that's the real question, isn't it? Why now? Why this gym? Jake could have walked into any place in the city, could have shut down any cocky amateur with a single demonstration of what he's still capable of. But he chose here. He chose them. And as the tension in the air thickens, as the jokes start crossing the line from cruel to dangerous, one thing becomes clear: this isn't just a story about a fighter making a comeback. It's about a storm that's been brewing for years, and everyone in this gym is about to get caught in the downpour. The only question left is who's really in control? Just when Jake thought he had the upper hand, the ground shifted beneath him. It started with something small. The locker where he stashed his training logs had been jimmied open, the pages torn out, leaving only a single crumpled note behind: "Some fights aren't worth finishing." The message was clear: someone knew why he was really here, and they weren't happy about it. But who? Marcus had been too busy flexing for his followers to pull off something this calculated. Lena had access, but she'd been the one pushing him to train harder, hadn't she? And Diego. There was something off about the way he kept lingering near the heavy bags whenever Jake worked the mitts, like he was studying more than just technique. Then came the phone call. A voice Jake hadn't heard in years, rough with static and something darker: regret, maybe, or a warning. "You're stirring up old ghosts, kid. Walk away before they start stirring back." The line went dead before Jake could respond, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't just about gym drama anymore. This was about the fight that ended his career, the one that never made the headlines, the one where the ref called it a freak accident while the promoters slipped him a check to keep his mouth shut. He'd taken the money back then, too broken to fight the system. But now? Someone was terrified he'd start talking. The real twist came at dawn, when Jake arrived early to find the gym's security footage from the night before mysteriously wiped except for one clipped segment. The grainy video showed a shadowed figure planting something under the bench press, the same bench Marcus used every Monday like clockwork. Jake's blood ran cold. This wasn't a prank. It was a setup. And if he didn't figure out who was pulling the strings fast, whatever came next wouldn't just end in humiliation, it could get someone killed. But the most chilling part? The figure on the tape moved with the precision of someone who knew their way around a fight because they'd been in the ring before. Now the clock was ticking. The gym's annual strength competition was days away, the perfect stage for a very public fall. Marcus was already bragging about his guaranteed win, oblivious to the trap being set. Lena kept exchanging hushed calls in the office, her sharp laughter cutting off the second Jake walked by. And Diego? He'd started leaving newspaper clippings about Jake's old fights in the locker room, not as tribute, but as a threat. "I know who you are." The pieces were there, but the picture they formed made no sense. Because if Jake's past was coming back to destroy him, why did it feel like he wasn't the real target? And then, just as Jake thought he'd hit a dead end, he found it, the one thing that tied everything together. Tucked in the back of his stolen training logs was a photo he hadn't seen in a decade. Himself, mid-knockout, the ref's hand hovering too late to stop the blow. But it wasn't the blood or the screaming crowd that froze him in place. It was the man in the corner, watching with cold satisfaction. A man who, as of last month, just so happened to be the new silent owner of Ironclad Fitness. The fight was never over. It was just waiting for round 2. And this time, the bell was about to ring. The photo wasn't the only thing that resurfaced from Jake's past. That same afternoon, his old sparring partner, Rico, the one who disappeared right after the fight that ended Jake's career, showed up unannounced. At the gym's back entrance, his face gaunt and his knuckles bruised like he'd been fighting barehanded for weeks. He didn't say hello. Just shoved a burner phone into Jake's chest and muttered, "They're watching you. And it's not just about the fight." Before Jake could demand answers, Rico was gone, vanishing into the alley shadows like a ghost. The phone had one contact saved, a single name, Ask Her, and a number Jake recognized instantly: his ex-wife, Sarah, the one person he'd sworn to keep out of this mess. Sarah hadn't spoken to him in years, not since the divorce papers were signed and she moved across the country to start over. But when Jake called, her voice wasn't angry, it was terrified. "They came to my job, Jake. Asked about you, about the money. Said you were digging into things that got people hurt." The line crackled as she took a shaky breath. "You need to stop. Because whatever you think happened back then, you don't know the half of it." Then, just like Rico, she was gone, leaving Jake with more questions than answers. What money? And who stood to lose enough to threaten someone who hadn't been in his life for years? Back at the gym, the tension thickened like storm clouds. Diego started accidentally bumping into Jake during drills, his elbow a little too sharp, his apologies a little too practiced. Lena began locking her office door, her usual smirk replaced by a tight-lipped silence. Even Marcus seemed off, his usual bravado cracked when a heavyweight powerlifter from a rival gym showed up uninvited, eyeing Marcus like he was a debt collector coming to settle a score. But the real twist came when Jake found a second photo slipped into his gym bag, this one of Rico and Sarah standing outside a bank, dated 2 weeks before his career-ending fight. The timestamp matched the day Jake remembered Rico borrowing $20,000, claiming it was for his sister's medical bills. Except Rico didn't have a sister. Now the pieces were falling into place, but the picture they painted made no sense. If Rico and Sarah were involved, why reach out now? Why warn him? And why did the heavyweight powerlifter keep glancing at the gym's security cameras like he was waiting for a signal? The deeper Jake dug, the more the past unraveled, because the fight that broke him wasn't an accident. It was a setup. And the people who orchestrated it weren't just hiding in the shadows anymore. They were standing right beside him, spotting him on the bench press, handing him towels, cheering him on like they hadn't already sold him out once before. Then, as Jake re-racked his weights, the overhead lights flickered once, twice before cutting out entirely. In the darkness, someone grabbed his wrist. The grip was familiar, calloused from years of holding mitts and wrapping hands. Lena's voice was a whisper against his ear, "They're going to frame you. Tonight. Walk out now, or you'll lose more than just your reputation." Before he could respond, the lights surged back on, and she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of menthol and gunpowder. The gym buzzed back to life like nothing happened, but Jake's blood ran cold. Because if Lena was telling the truth, then the real fight wasn't in the ring. It was in the next 24 hours. And this time, the punches wouldn't be thrown with fists. The text came through at 3:17 a.m., a grainy video attachment with no message, just a silent loop of Jake's apartment door filmed from the hallway. The timestamp showed it had been recorded less than an hour earlier, while he slept just feet away, oblivious. His fingers tightened around the phone as the video zoomed in on a slip of paper being slid beneath his door, the same crumpled note now in his hand: "You should have stayed retired." The camera panned up just enough to catch a glimpse of a wrist tattoo, a coiled snake with a missing thong. Jake knew that ink. It belonged to Torres, the cut man who'd worked his corner the night everything went wrong, the one who'd pressed the ice pack to his swollen eye and whispered, "Sorry, kid," like he knew what was coming. Sleep was impossible after that. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant car engine became a threat. By dawn, Jake's paranoia had sharpened into a cold, razor-edged focus. He drove to Rico's last known address, only to find the apartment stripped bare, a single boxing glove left on the kitchen counter, sliced clean down the middle. No struggle, no note, just the quiet, deliberate erasure of a man who knew too much. The glove wasn't just a message, it was a trophy. Someone was cleaning house, and Jake was next on the list. Back at the gym, the air hummed with tension. Diego was absent for the first time since Jake had arrived, his locker left open like he'd walked out mid-change. Marcus lifted weights with a frenetic energy, his eyes darting to the exits every few minutes. Even the usual playlist of pump-up anthems had been replaced by an eerie silence. When Jake approached Lena's office, he found the door ajar, her computer screen still glowing with an open email of flight confirmation to Belize, one way, leaving that night. But it was the sticky note beside it that stopped him cold. Tell Jake to check the tapes. He'll understand. The security room was locked, but the keycard Lena always kept in her desk drawer slid through with a quiet click. The monitors flickered to life, showing empty angles of the gym empty except for one feed. The camera in the far corner, usually pointed at the squat racks, had been repositioned to focus on the alley outside. And there, frozen in the grayscale footage, was Diego in a heated argument with a man whose face was obscured by a hood, but the way he moved, the way his hands sliced the air with military precision, matched the shadowy figure from the earlier tape. Diego handed over a flash drive, received a thick envelope in return, then turned back toward the gym's rear entrance just as the footage cut to static. Jake's stomach twisted. He'd trusted Diego, or at least, he'd thought he could predict him. But this? This was betrayal with a paper trail. He reached to eject the flash drive Lena had left taped under the desk, but the screen suddenly went black, replaced by a single line of text: "You're not the only one who knows how to edit footage." The speakers crackled to life with a distorted voice, whether human or AI, Jake couldn't tell, reciting an address on the industrial side of town, followed by, "Midnight. Come alone, or Sarah pays for your curiosity." The gym's front door slammed open, flooding the room with sunlight. Jake spun, fists raised, expecting a threat, but it was just Marcus, pale and sweating, his usual swagger replaced by raw panic. "You need to get out of here," he hissed, shoving a set of car keys into Jake's hand. "They're coming. And they're not here for a workout." When Jake demanded answers, Marcus just shook his head, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You think this is about some old fight? They're not trying to scare you, man. They're trying to recruit you. And if you say no?" He tapped the fresh bruise blooming across his ribs. "Let's just say I wasn't their first choice." The keys burned in Jake's palm. Every instinct screamed to run, to disappear like Rico had. But the image of Sarah's frightened face flashed behind his eyes, and he knew this wasn't just his fight anymore. Someone had pulled strings in the dark for years, turning his life into a puppet show. And tonight, he'd either cut those strings or become just another ghost in their collection. The address in his head matched an abandoned meatpacking plant, the kind of place where screams got lost in industrial freezers. But as Jake stepped into the sunlight, he realized the worst part: he wasn't scared. He was angry. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like power. The abandoned meatpacking plant reeked of rust and ammonia, the flickering fluorescent lights casting jagged shadows across the blood-stained concrete. Jake moved silently through the maze of defunct machinery, every sense on high alert, until the voice stopped him dead in his tracks. "You always did walk too loud for a champ." The words slithered out of the darkness, too familiar, too impossible. And then she stepped into the light, Sarah, but not the Sarah he remembered. This woman wore a tactical vest, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, a Glock holstered at her hip. The fear in her voice from their phone call was gone, replaced by the cool detachment of someone who'd been running operations long before Jake ever stepped into that gym. "You were never supposed to come back," she said, her voice echoing off the empty meat hooks overhead. "But when you started sniffing around Ironclad, we knew we had to reel you in properly." The pieces began crashing together in Jake's mind: the staged threats, Rico's disappearance, even Marcus's sudden change of heart. It was all theater. Sarah hadn't been dragged into this, she'd been pulling the strings the whole time. The realization hit him like a liver shot: the career-ending fight wasn't just fixed. It was an audition. She tossed a file at his feet, photos spilling out, surveillance shots of Jake training alone in the gym's off hours, pages of psychological profiles, bank transfers from shell companies he vaguely recognized. You think this is about some petty revenge? Sarah laughed, the sound bouncing off the stainless steel walls. We've been grooming you for years. That accident in the ring? That was the final test. We needed to see how you'd handle losing everything. The truth unfolded like a nightmare: the gym, the harassment, even Lena's warnings, all staged to push Jake to his breaking point. Because broken men make the best weapons. But the real twist came when the overhead lights suddenly blazed to full brightness, revealing Diego and a squad of tactical operatives emerging from the shadows, not to attack Jake, but to flank Sarah like a personal guard. Diego's military precision finally made sense. He wasn't some hired thug, he was her lieutenant. Meet the real owner of Ironclad Fitness, Diego said, nodding to Sarah. The gym wasn't a battleground, it was a recruiting ground. They'd been watching, testing, manipulating every interaction to see if Jake still had that killer instinct buried under years of self-loathing. Sarah stepped closer, her hand brushing the scar over Jake's eyebrow, the one from the freak accident that ended his career. You passed every test, she murmured. The patience, the restraint, the way you tracked every variable in that gym like it was the ring. That's why we're offering you a choice. She pressed a cold metal object into his palm, a keycard with a familiar logo. Not a gym. Not a safe house. The insignia matched the private security firm that had been embroiled in political scandals for years, the one rumored to handle wet work for governments and corporations alike. Jake's breath came ragged as the final piece clicked into place. They didn't want to kill him. They wanted to hire him. Every humiliation, every betrayal, every dark night of the soul had been engineered to forge him into something sharper. The realization should have enraged him, but the terrifying part? Part of him was flattered. The silence stretched as Jake stared at the keycard, the weight of it heavier than any championship belt. Because the choice wasn't between life and death. It was between the man he'd become and the monster they knew he could be. Somewhere in the darkness, a phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed one word: Lena. And just like that, the game changed again. The phone kept ringing, Lena's name flashing like a warning beacon in the dim light of the meatpacking plant. Jake's fingers hovered over the screen, torn between answering and smashing the device against the blood-stained concrete. Sarah watched him with the calm patience of a predator who already knew how the hunt would end, her gloved fingers tapping against her thigh in a slow, rhythmic countdown. You should get that, she said, her voice dripping with false concern. She's been such a good friend to you, after all. The way she emphasized friend made Jake's stomach twist, because if Sarah had orchestrated everything up to this point, then Lena's role in all of this was no accident either. He answered on the last ring, bracing himself for another betrayal. But Lena's voice wasn't the cool, calculated tone of a conspirator, it was raw, panicked, the words tumbling out in a breathless rush. Jake, listen to me, whatever she told you, it's a lie. The keycard, the job offer, none of it's real. They don't want to recruit you. They want to own you. A muffled sound cut through the line, like someone struggling, before Lena gasped, the fight wasn't the test. This is. They need to see if you'll break. When the call cut off with a sharp click, leaving Jake standing there, the silence pressing in around him like a physical weight. Sarah sighed, shaking her head as if disappointed. Lena always did have a flair for the dramatic. But let's be honest, did you really think a washed-up cut woman from the regional circuit would risk everything to help you out of the goodness of her heart? She pulled out her own phone, swiping to a video feed that showed Lena bound to a chair in what looked like a storage room, her face bruised but her eyes blazing with defiance. She's been working against us from the start. Feeding you just enough truth to keep you chasing your tail. But here's the thing, Jake, you've got one chance to walk out of here with her. One chance to prove you're still the fighter we think you are. She nodded to Diego, who stepped forward with a sleek black duffel bag, unzipping it to reveal stacks of cash, a passport with Jake's photo but a different name, and a handgun. Midnight flight to Buenos Aires. New identity, new life, no questions asked, Sarah said, her gaze locked onto Jake's. All you have to do is walk away. Right now. Leave Lena to us, forget everything you've seen, and disappear. She let the offer hang in the air before adding, or you can take the keycard. Join us. And we'll let Lena go. But once you're in, Jake, there's no walking away. Not ever. Jake's hands clenched at his sides, his mind racing. The passport meant freedom, a clean slate, no more ghosts, no more fights. But the gun? That was a different kind of message. It wasn't just an escape plan. It was a test. If he took the money and ran, they'd know he was broken. If he chose the keycard, they'd own him forever. And if he refused both? Well, the meatpacking plant had plenty of hooks for a reason. But then he noticed the slightest tremor in Sarah's fingers, the way her eyes flicked toward the exits a fraction too often. She was nervous. Not of him, but of something else. Someone else. The realization hit him like a gut punch. Sarah wasn't in control here either. This was all just another layer of the game, and the real players were still in the shadows. The overhead lights flickered again, and for a split second, Jake saw the reflection of a red laser sight dancing across Sarah's chest. Someone else was here. Watching. Waiting. And they weren't on Sarah's side. Jake met Sarah's eyes, his voice low and steady. You first, he said. Tell me who really owns Ironclad. Then I'll choose. Sarah's smirk faltered. Just for a second. But it was enough. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the lights, a safety clicked off. The laser sight wasn't just a warning, it was a countdown. Jake saw the moment Sarah registered the threat, her carefully constructed mask of control fracturing as her eyes darted toward the catwalks above. The realization hit them both at the same time: this wasn't her operation anymore. Someone had turned the game against the players. Diego moved first, his military instincts kicking in as he shoved Sarah behind a pallet of rusted steel drums, his hand already drawing his sidearm. But before he could fire, a single gunshot cracked through the cavernous space, the bullet punching through Diego's shoulder with surgical precision. He went down hard, his weapon skidding across the concrete as a voice echoed from the shadows, a voice Jake hadn't heard in years but would recognize anywhere. You were always too slow, Torres. The man who stepped into the light wasn't the washed-up cut man Jake remembered. This version of Torres wore a tailored suit, his snake tattoo now hidden under cufflinks, his once bloodied hands clean and manicured. But the cold calculation in his eyes was the same. Behind him, a half-dozen armed operatives fanned out, their rifles trained on Sarah's team. Did you really think you could steal my assets and I wouldn't notice? Torres asked, his voice dripping with amusement. Jake was mine the moment he took the dive in the ring. Just like Lena was mine when she patched him up afterward. Just like you were mine, Sarah, when I let you think you could run this little rebellion. Jake's blood turned to ice. Every betrayal, every manipulated moment, it all traced back to Torres. The fight that ended his career. The debts that broke Rico. Even Sarah's sudden reappearance in his life. It had never been about recruitment or revenge. It was about control. Torres didn't just own fighters, he owned their pain, their desperation, their willingness to do anything for one more shot at redemption. And Jake had walked right into the trap. Sarah spat blood onto the concrete, her earlier composure gone. You're a dead man walking, Torres. The cartel bosses you've been double-crossing? They know everything. That's why they sent him. She jerked her chin toward the shadows, where a new figure emerged, the heavyweight powerlifter from the gym, the one who'd been eyeing Marcus like a marked man. Up close, Jake recognized the gang tattoos peeking above his collar, the knuckles scarred from something far worse than barbells. This wasn't just a debt collector. This was cartel enforcement. Torres actually laughed. You brought a Sicario to a war? Cute. He snapped his fingers, and the overhead lights surged to full brightness, revealing the true horror of the meatpacking plant. Dozens of figures in tactical gear positioned on every catwalk, every exit, their weapons trained not just on Jake and Sarah, but on the cartel enforcer too. I don't just own fighters, Mijo. I own cops. I own politicians. And after tonight, He grinned, tapping the side of his head. I'll own every dirty secret your precious Lena's been collecting in that little black book of hers. Jake's mind raced. Lena hadn't just been helping him, she'd been documenting everything. The fixed fights. The money laundering through gym memberships. The bodies buried under construction sites Torres's shell companies had funded. She'd been building a case this whole time, using Jake as bait to draw them all into the open. A vibration buzzed in Jake's pocket. Lena's phone, somehow still transmitting. A single text glowed on the screen: the files are uploaded. Light the match. Torres's smile faded as his own phone began ringing, the caller ID flashing a name that made even his operatives tense: DEA. Callahan. The district attorney Lena had been secretly feeding evidence to for months. Jake didn't wait. He lunged for Diego's fallen gun, rolling behind a conveyor belt as the room erupted into chaos. Cartel gunmen firing up at the catwalks, Torres's men returning fire, Sarah screaming orders to a team that was already scattering. The staccato gunfire was deafening, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and something darker, something metallic and primal. But in that split second of clarity, Jake realized the truth: none of them were getting out alive unless they worked together. He locked eyes with Sarah across the battlefield, then with the cartel enforcer, then finally with Diego, who gave him the slightest nod. 4 enemies. 1 common threat. Jake chambered around. The real fight started now. The gunfire had turned the meatpacking plant into a war zone, bullets pinging off steel beams and shredding through pallets of rotting cardboard. Jake moved like a ghost through the chaos, every step measured, every breath controlled, the way he used to move in the ring when he could feel the knockout coming. Sarah was pinned down near the loading docks, trading shots with Torres' men. The cartel enforcer had vanished into the shadows, a predator waiting to strike. And Diego? He was crawling toward Lena's bound figure, a knife glinting in his good hand. Jake had one shot. One chance to end this before the cops, or worse. Torres bought and paid for SWAT team stormed the place. He lunged for the duffel bag Sarah had dropped, fingers closing around the cold metal of the handgun just as Torres' voice cut through the gunfire. Jake! Look at me. Torres stood in the center of the slaughterhouse floor, arms spread like a preacher welcoming the end times. Behind him, 2 of his men dragged Lena forward, a pistol pressed to her temple. Her face was a mess of blood and bruises, but her eyes were clear, focused. She met Jake's gaze and gave the slightest shake of her head. Don't do it. You want the truth? Torres shouted over the echoing gunshots. Here it is. That night in the ring? The ref didn't just take a bribe. You were supposed to die. A tragic accident. A champion's heart giving out. But you wouldn't. Stop. Getting up. He laughed, wild and unhinged. And then Lena here, sweet, loyal Lena, she saved your life. She knew the plan. She always knew. The words hit Jake like a sledgehammer. Lena hadn't just been documenting Torres' crimes, she'd been atoning for her own. Every patch-up, every warning, every late-night phone call checking on him. It wasn't just guilt. It was penance. Torres pulled a sleek silver remote from his pocket. Enough talking. Time to choose. You walk away now, I blow the charges under the foundation and we all go out in a bang. Or he tossed a second keycard at Jake's feet, this one emblazoned with a black crown. You take your rightful place at my side. The prodigal son returns. Jake stared at the card, the weight of the gun in his hand suddenly unbearable. He could almost hear the ghosts of his past whispering his old trainer, his fans, the version of himself that still believed in honor. But louder than any of them was Lena's voice, rasping through broken teeth, do it, kid. Finish it. The gunshot was deafening. Torres staggered back, his face frozen in shock as the red bloom spread across his chest. But it wasn't Jake who'd fired. Sarah lowered her smoking pistol, her expression unreadable as Torres collapsed. Wrong choice, she muttered. Then, to Jake's horror, she turned the gun toward Lena. The files are already out, Jake shouted, stepping between them. Killing her won't change anything. Sarah's smile was chilling. Who said anything about killing her? The explosion rocked the building before Jake could react, not from below, but from the roof. The skylight shattered as ropes dropped through the smoke, black-clad figures rappelling down with terrifying precision. Not cops. Not cartel. Private military. Sarah holstered her gun, stepping back as the operatives secured the room with brutal efficiency. Torres was small time, she said, almost apologetic. But the people he worked for? They're very interested in a fighter who can take a fall and keep getting back up. She tossed Jake a phone live footage of Rico, bruised but alive, strapped to a chair in a concrete room. Midnight flight still on the table. But now? You're not the only one boarding it. The last twist wasn't in the cards. It was in Jake's hands. Lena's voice cut through the ringing in his ears. Look down. The silver remote Torres had dropped, the one that supposedly controlled the bombs, was a fake. A prop. Just like everything else. Jake met Sarah's eyes and saw the truth. There were never any charges. The real explosion was coming. And it would be him. The smoke cleared, leaving Jake standing in the center of the ruined meatpacking plant, the weight of the gun still warm in his hand. Around him, the private military operatives moved with cold efficiency, loading Torres' body onto a stretcher, cuffing the cartel enforcer, silencing any loose ends. Sarah watched him with those unreadable eyes, waiting for his decision, but the choice had already been made the moment he saw Rico's bruised face on that screen. Somewhere in the chaos, Lena had vanished, slipping through the cracks like she always did, leaving behind only a single bloodied handprint on the wall and a whisper of menthol in the air. Jake knew he'd never see her again. Maybe that was her final gift to him, the freedom of not having to say goodbye. He dropped the gun, letting it clatter against the concrete, and picked up the keycard with the black crown. Sarah's smile was triumphant, but Jake wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the security camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. Somewhere, someone was watching. Recording. Judging. And Jake? He let them see the moment his face changed, the moment the fire in his eyes went from desperate to calculated, from broken to dangerous. They wanted a weapon? Fine. But sharp edges cut both ways. 6 months later, an encrypted video file surfaced on the dark web. Grainy footage of a masked man with familiar scarred knuckles dismantling a private security firm's headquarters, freeing prisoners with military precision. The video cut out before his face was revealed, but the message scrawled on the wall in spray paint was clear: "Tell Sarah I'm clocking in." Back in the city, in a rundown gym that smelled of sweat and old leather, a heavy-set man in a hoodie re-racked his weights quietly. No one looked at him twice. No one noticed the fresh ink peeking from his sleeve, a snake with its fangs bared, crowned in black. And in a hospital in Belize, Lena opened her eyes to a bouquet of flowers and an unsigned note: "Some fights are worth finishing." The screen fades to black. But the story? It's just getting started.